The Horcrux Hunt by Keysie, Chapter 2 March, 1979. The library's darkest text reads like a bedtime story in comparison to the Black family collection back at Grimmauld Place. It had become apparent just days into the new school term that the answers he sought, how to destroy a Horcrux, were not held in the halls of Hogwarts. Kreacher had been diligently fetching any book he requested, bringing them to and from Grimmauld Place so that Regulus's research was not impeded by the time he had to spend in the castle. He had ordered Kreacher to take the locket and to hide it somewhere safe, somewhere no one would find it, and to not tell a soul where, not even Regulus. Especially not Regulus. The threat of discovery still loomed dark over his shoulder, and he worried that, by asking this of Kreacher, he was once again gambling with the house elf's life. If the Dark Lord were to discover the fake locket that sat where his soul should be, wherever Kreacher is will be the first place he would go looking. And wherever Regulus is would undoubtedly be the second. He had worried and he had fretted, but in the end, it was the only option available to him, and so he had given the order and trusted the house elf to see it through. The knowledge that Kreacher would have gladly hidden the Horcrux for him, even knowing the risk it posed, even if he hadn't given the order, just makes Regulus feel even worse. The night before he had returned to Hogwarts, Regulus had reluctantly acknowledged that he was still no closer to completing his task, and despite being in possession of the locket, he wouldn't be any time soon, not until he found out how to destroy the Horcrux. His lack of progress at Grimmauld was frustrating, and it worried him. If it continued, which he unenthusiastically believed was the case, then he would need the time to continue his research before making any future attempts. And whilst Hogwarts feels like the safest space to hurl spells at the severed soul of Lord Voldemort, it is also the worst place for a disillusioned Death Eater to attempt sabotage. Dumbledore, McGonagall, the rest of the teaching staff and likely the majority of the student body wouldn't take kindly to him performing dark magic, and even more likely, wouldn't believe the truth on account of the tattoo that stains the skin of his left arm. And if someone from Slytherin were to stumble across even the tiniest semblance of the truth, that would not bode well for Regulus. There are not many marked Death Eaters at Hogwarts, not in terms of numbers, and none below the age of 17, that was an honor reserved for none but the Black Sun, but the majority of his house are in the least aligned with the Dark Lord. His roommates included. Evan Rosier had been the first to follow in Regulus's footsteps over the summer between their 6th and 7th years. They are friends beyond simply being roommates, but Regulus knows that fact would only make Evan discovering his deception all the more painful for him. Because whilst they may be aligned politically, Regulus has always felt a little uneasy by the depth of his obsession with the dark arts and with pureblood supremacy. He has taken to being a Death Eater like a duck to water. He fits perfectly into their ranks, a place where his cruelty and recklessness is celebrated. He wouldn't hesitate to put his wand to anyone's neck, not even Regulus's. Rubinroll is as good as a Death Eater despite the unmarred, fair skin of his left forearm. It was the worst-kept secret in Slytherin that the moment he graduated Hogwarts he would join his father's side in Voldemort's ranks, as would his younger brother Thorfinn, despite only being a second year. The Rolls had long since been known as a dark family, similar to if not worse than the Blacks, only with less political standing due to the extremity and publicness of their beliefs. Rolls were Death Eaters long before the Dark Lord had appeared and the phrase had been coined, and Regulus would not survive an encounter with Rubin if he were ever to be outed as a traitor. But of all of Regulus's roommates, if Barty Crouch Jr. were to ever find out, it would be worse. Barty is different, he is pureblood, yes, he is Sacred 28, also yes, but the Crouch family is not dark. But Barty is. He was the first true friend Regulus had ever made at Hogwarts, and they had fallen quickly into a close friendship. Over the years, that friendship had developed into more only casual, friends with benefits, but ever since Regulus was marked, something had changed. Barty runs his tongue over the inside of Regulus's left arm almost as much as he does over Regulus's cock. It's a perverted kind of worship, born from the fact that until he has graduated Hogwarts and can get out from underneath his father's thumb, he himself cannot be marked. And you cannot be a Death Eater without a mark. The Dark Lord does not make exceptions. Not even when begged. Regulus doesn't know what would happen if Barty were to discover his secret, but he knows it would be bad. It would be worse, and so Regulus had focused his time since returning to Hogwarts on research. It's Newt season, so no one bats an eyelid at his preoccupation with studying, not even his roommates. He has always been studious, committed to his education, an overachiever. This means two things for Regulus. One, that he can more than manage the cutback of his revision schedule given he knows the exam materials like the back of his hand, and two, that there is nothing unusual about Regulus Black holed away, alone, at the back of the Hogwarts library. Except it's all a moot point, because in the 3 months he's spent at the castle, he hasn't gotten anywhere. Regulus doesn't know how much time he has until Voldemort realizes his betrayal, but he knows whatever time he does have is running out. And fast. April 1979, at the beginning of the school year, Regulus had planned to stay at the castle for the Easter break, along with practically every other 7th-year student studying for their Newts. At the beginning of the school year, however, Regulus had not had in his possession the amputated soul of the Dark Lord. His research efforts since returning to Hogwarts have been utterly fruitless, the ever-present steady slip of sand through the hourglass sitting weighty and burdensome on his back. He had made the decision that he had nothing to lose in returning home to put the little he's learned to the test, and had boarded the Hogwarts Express 1 week ago, determined. If his research efforts were deemed fruitless, however, his practical efforts since his arrival at Grimmauld Place can only be described as futile. Unsurprisingly, there is little literature that discusses Horcruxes at any length, and even more sparingly, how to destroy one. There has only ever been one recorded account of a Horcrux being made, by Herpo the Foul, and Regulus had even tried using some of the many awful terrible curses he had invented. The man had earned his name twice over, in his attempts to destroy the locket. He had read Secrets of the Darkest art cover to cover, and tried every destructive magic listed in its pages that he had the capacity to perform. He had even cast Avada Kedavra. And nothing even makes a dent. Regulus's mind races as he paces the length of the basement room he had chosen as his workspace. He is running on fumes, both his physical and magical energy exhausted, having spent the majority of every day and night of the past week down in the basement throwing everything and anything he can at the locket. To no avail. Just the shields he's had to erect to keep him from doing more damage to himself than the Horcrux feel like they're taking all of the life out of him, and he is at his wit's end. Maybe the Dark Lord's arrogance is justified. Maybe a Horcrux cannot be destroyed, and the reason that Voldemort has not come for him is not because he is not yet aware of Regulus's betrayal, but because this has all been an elaborate trap set for him to walk straight into. Maybe he is the Dark Lord's entertainment from where he sits, laughing, watching the boy pretending to be a man struggle with the impossible task. He knows that is not true, knows that the voice inside his head is fueled by his doubts and his worries and the sheer and utter exhaustion that plagues his body and mind. Horcruxes can be destroyed. Extraordinarily durable, as only very destructive magic and processes can truly destroy them, the book had said. He just needs to find more destructive magic, more destructive processes. What even is a destructive process? Regulus's hands find their way into his hair in his frustration, the cadence of his pacing not letting up despite his bone-tiredness. He casts his mind back over Voldemort's taunting words, hoping to find something, anything to help finish this perilous task. I have traveled further along the path to immortality than any other. Before me, could he have somehow strengthened the locket, the container for the severed soul? He can't have strengthened the Horcrux itself, that is beyond the realms of magic, but the locket. No man has achieved what I have done, an improved container. The books had said nothing beyond using an inanimate object rather than a living thing, and he doubts sticking your soul in a pretty little locket is what the Dark Lord had meant. I have guarded myself against mortal death. If protections on the container of the Horcrux could be strengthened beyond belief, why the need for protections at the location of the Horcrux? The Dark Lord is not one to waste effort on additional, technically unnecessary protections. He is too arrogant. I have reached beyond all others' attempts, beyond all others. There is only one other, known, confirmed Horcrux creator. To travel further, to go beyond, Voldemort must have had to make a Horcrux better, improved in some way. But that is impossible. A Horcrux is a Horcrux. No other is capable of doing what I have achieved. To go further, to advance past the only other before him, Voldemort must have made something better, and if not something better, I have gone beyond the boundaries set by others, he had to have made more. Regulus's pacing stops, and so does his heart. Horcruxes. Plural. His mind has only had a few moments to consider the possibility, but that is enough for him to know, deep down, that it is the truth. The worst part of the realization is that it feels right, like the only logical progression for the Dark Lord to make. Regulus bristles at the discomforting knowledge that he can understand, can anticipate the mind of a madman. He has said, from the beginning, that Voldemort is arrogant beyond belief. Why would he stop at one Horcrux, when that's a feat that's been achieved at least once before? Performing the achievable is not befitting of a supposed lord. It explains why Regulus was able to survive the retrieval of the Horcrux. It explains why the security of the defenses the Dark Lord had put in place were so arguably lax, and it explains why Voldemort had been so comfortable boasting about his immortality, dropping hints to be heard by anyone with more than 2 spare thoughts. There is more than one. This was always bigger than Regulus, but now it is too big, so big that it is unmanageable, so big that he cannot contain it in just his hands. He cannot fight Voldemort and his army of souls alone. How does one lone mortal man fight the immortal? Regulus reaches blindly out for the wall, his eyes glued to the locket where it lays innocently across the room, glistening and deceptively incorrupt on the charred and spell-damaged table. He has been bested for months by this loathsome bauble, and the knowledge that it has a twin, or even is just one in a full set, sits heavy on his chest, crushing his ribs, smothering his lungs. Regulus's body collapses into the solid weight of the wall, and he slides pitifully down to the ground below, hands shaking, breath short and shallow in panic. How do you stop a man who'd shred his soul so that he may survive? For the first time since he had assigned himself this task, Regulus acknowledges that he needs help. He knows of the resistance, knows that it is led by the one man Voldemort fears, but he wants no part in the fight for the light. Running to the Order is the absolute last thing he wants. Just the idea of doing so makes him feel weak and pathetic and spineless and treacherous, which is idiotic because he is a traitor, but not to the cause. He is a traitor to the devil that leads it. But what else is there to do? He is burdened with glorious purpose, and it is a burden he can no longer carry, not alone, not without the ruin of hundreds, thousands, millions of lives. Regulus is not selfless, he is afraid. How can I be of assistance, Mr. Black? Professor Slughorn informed me you wished to speak regarding a matter of utmost importance. Those weren't exactly the words Regulus had used, but the sentiment is there. There's something childish inside him that bristles at Dumbledore's air of nonchalance, despite the weight and supposed sincerity of his words. Regulus has never seen the old wizard ruffled, or even anything beyond politely surprised, and the desire to provoke a reaction burns high within him. It is likely this desire that motivates the first words he is to say to his headmaster since he stepped into his office, and in fact, the first words Regulus has ever directly spoken to Dumbledore: "I am a Death Eater." The headmaster nods, face unchanged, like Regulus had just told him he expected it would rain tomorrow. Tea? Regulus doesn't want tea, he wants a reaction, as juvenile as that may be. He ignores Dumbledore's question and instead leans forward in the disgusting chintz armchair that had been conjured for him to sit in, and lifts the sleeve of his robes, raising his arm up and exposing the dark mark. He watches as the older wizard's eyes take in Regulus's bare arm for only a moment before they move back up to scrutinize his face. They are both silent for some time, Regulus with his arm thrust out defiantly, Dumbledore watching him with the air of someone disinterestedly scanning the advertisement pages of the Daily Prophet, as they wait around for something more exciting to happen. Or would you prefer a lemon drop? He's so infuriatingly unflustered that Regulus entertains the idea that maybe Voldemort is right to hate this man. Regulus certainly does in this moment. He grinds his jaw and doesn't reply once again, refusing to encourage Dumbledore's tendency to talk over and around things, speaking of nothing more than pleasantries and the weather whilst the world rages on. He is sure it's some sort of intimidation tactic meant to throw you off or lure you into a false sense of security, and even if it were not, Regulus does not believe in small talk. And he most certainly doesn't believe in accepting strange sweets from strange men. After nearly a full minute of stalemate, Dumbledore seems to grow bored with their silent staring contest and acknowledges Regulus properly. "I assume you have asked to see me for a reason beyond informing me of your Alignment with Voldemort? Regulus barely resists the urge to roll his eyes, pulling back his now aching arm and rolling down his sleeve. How nice of you to have finally caught on. I am no longer aligned with him. This statement receives the same physical reaction as his earlier one, that is, it receives none. Should that be true, whilst I am glad to hear of your change of heart, that puts you in an unenviable position, my boy. He bristles at the inappropriateness of such a familiar term, which he has no doubt that Dumbledore picks up on, and the sheer obviousness of his response. Regulus does not quite manage to keep the sneer from his voice, but then, he hadn't really tried to. I am aware. However, I have considered the options available to me, and there is no other viable alternative. The blue eyes are still trained on Regulus's face, scrutinizing, calculating. You wish for my help? Regulus has little doubt that his body language screams quite clearly how much this fact pains him. Unfortunately, I have taken on a task that I am unable to complete alone. You are the only wizard that I believe capable and motivated enough to support me in my endeavor. And what, may I ask, is this task you speak of? Dumbledore's elbows come up to rest against the top of his mahogany desk, fingers steepled together as he continues to consider Regulus where he sits, straight-backed and solemn in the ridiculous floral chair. I am in possession of the Dark Lord's Horcrux, and I wish to destroy it. Here it is. There's the reaction Regulus has been waiting for. It's minimal given the somber topic of conversation, but it's there. Dumbledore's eyebrows raise, properly, not just a quick quirk of the brow, and he leans back into his high-backed chair, elbows dropping into his lap from where they had been perched on the desk that separates the two men. After a still, silent moment, a wave of Dumbledore's left hand summons a bottle of deep amber liquid from the depths of his office, two glasses floating across to land lightly on the desk from a shelf somewhere on Regulus's right-hand side. Dumbledore doesn't bother to offer this time, just pours Regulus a drink and slides it across to him with another lazy wave of his hand. Oddly, considering the gravity of the situation, Regulus feels triumphant. He has flapped the unflappable. He waits for Dumbledore to drink before sipping his own measure of the mellow, oaky brandy, which the old wizard notes with an amused raise of his right eyebrow. You can take the Slytherin out of the dungeon. I have many questions, Mr. Black, but my most pressing is how Lord Voldemort's Horcrux came to be in your possession. There doesn't seem to be anything in Dumbledore's voice to indicate his surprise at the existence of the Horcrux, but, if he's interpreting it correctly, there does seem to be a hint of intrigue over Regulus's possession of it. And, maybe, over his intent to destroy it. He briefly considers interpreting this as a slight and feeling insulted, before acknowledging that the fact he is so often greatly underestimated is something he prides himself on, relies on even. Regulus takes a deep drink of the admittedly delicious and likely top-shelf liquor, drawing from its much-needed warmth, and tells Dumbledore the story of how he acquired a damaged shard of the soul of the great Dark Lord. It is an abridged version of the tale, delivered coldly, without feeling or emotion, barely more than a statement of facts. He had come prepared to tell the story with just the right amount of detail, to show Dumbledore he was telling the truth so that he would not doubt Regulus's motivations or solemnity, but not enough to expose his thoughts or his feelings. He does not trust this man. There is silence for some time following the conclusion of Regulus's recount of events. Dumbledore has held his eyes the entire time, barely blinking, and he has allowed it. Regulus had anticipated the wizard would perform legilimency. He does not believe the man to be polite or trusting enough not to, but finds himself surprised at the skill in which it is done. He can barely feel the brush of magic in his mind, and likely would not feel it at all if he hadn't been expecting it. Dumbledore is powerful, and this is an unsettling reminder of that fact. That is quite a story, Mr. Black. Forgive me if I take some time to digest it all. Regulus doesn't care to sit around whilst he does so. Like with everything he does, he had come into Dumbledore's office with a plan, and this involves leaving the wizard with no reason to doubt the honesty of his words. Regulus does not have the time for it. I am aware of the outlandishness of my tale, and that you likely doubt my motivations and even my loyalties. I can therefore show you the locket, to prove I am not a liar. To prove I am sincere. He waits as Dumbledore considers his words, watching as he takes another drink of brandy from the decoratively cut crystal tumbler. The locket? Regulus blinks, embarrassed that he had missed mentioning quite a vital detail in his story, and wills himself not to blush under Dumbledore's watchful eye. The Horcrux. It is contained within a locket. Blue eyes narrow contemplatively behind half-moon glasses. That is most interesting. Do you have it with you? No. Regulus is still unaware of the locket's location. Just as he had planned, Dumbledore nods. Do you have the ability to retrieve it? Yes. He may need the wizard's help, but that does not mean he has lost his pride. He knows he likely sounds petulant and pedantic, but he stays firm. He will not become another child soldier to be puppeteered. Regulus has had his fair share of that under Voldemort. Dumbledore smiles, but there's no warmth in the gesture. Then please, do. Regulus calls for Creature, who appears only seconds later, and asks him to fetch the Horcrux, dismissing him upon his return. Dumbledore reaches across the desk to where Regulus had placed the locket, hands hovering but not touching for a moment. Regulus does not know if he is checking for curses placed there by Voldemort or by himself. With the assessment apparently complete, Dumbledore lifts the Horcrux tenderly, letting the fine links of the golden chain run across his palm, the thumb of his right hand brushing softly across the face of the locket. His examination lasts some time, but eventually, whatever information he has gleaned seems to be enough to believe Regulus's story. Dumbledore places the locket back down onto the desk and looks up at him. Thank you for bringing this to me. Regulus almost scoffs. I did not do it as a favor, Professor. Another nod, another empty, humorless smile. You wish for me to destroy it. At this, Regulus sits up in his chair, back straight, jaw firm, eyes hard. I need your assistance to destroy it, yes. But there is more. There are more. The room is still. It feels like even the myriad of odd devices displayed all across the headmaster's office are in stasis whilst they wait for Dumbledore's response, like everything sat in the overfilled, grandiose room had taken a collective breath in. There is more than one Horcrux. He takes his own deep, collective breath, and ignores the fact it is audibly shaky. I believe so, yes. Dumbledore's eyes close for a few, long seconds. Regulus marvels once again at the fact that this is only the second time he's seen the headmaster react properly to anything, even the idiotic performances by his brother's band of misfits, and that once again, he is the cause. Whilst it is still a gross underreaction, Dumbledore closing his eyes is the equivalent of a blood-curdling scream for the average human being. How is it that you have come to believe this? I have inferred it. From the Dark Lord's behavior, the weak protections around his Horcrux, his arrogance, his boasting of his progression down the path to immortality supposedly further than any other. I have no proof, but I believe it to be true. Regulus's jaw is tense, ready to defend his logic, to fight against the doubts the older wizard will cast. But they do not come, as do I. Silence descends once again. It is odd that they sit in the heart of a bustling castle filled with children, as Regulus has never felt so isolated, so far removed from any semblance of normality, so distant from childhood innocence and naivety. I would like to assist you in your task. You are correct in your belief that I am motivated to ensure the destruction of this and any other Horcrux, and I believe myself capable of doing so. Regulus lets out a breath of relief he had not even realized he was holding. Good. But I will need some time to assess the situation and how we can proceed. I will call you to my office once I have done so. He takes the dismissal for what it is and rises from his seat, smoothing down his robes where he stands in front of Dumbledore. Understood. Before he turns to leave, however, the headmaster speaks again. I would also like to offer you dispensation regarding your newt should you require it, given your preoccupation. Regulus actually does scoff this time. As if I would need it. Professor. Dumbledore meets his eyes and holds them, searching, but Regulus does not know what he is trying to find. You can trust me, Mr. Black. It's such a ridiculous assertion that Regulus almost laughs out loud. And yet despite those reaffirming words I do not, Professor Dumbledore. The headmaster smiles at him, condescendingly, despite his snarky tone and the sheer disrespect of his words. Regulus just wants to leave, even if that means he is to go down to the dungeons and sit amongst his house, his peers, his friends, with the knowledge that if they knew what he had just done, they would kill him where he sat, because Dumbledore is so fucking infuriating, and he needs get out to process the fact he's put his head in the hands of a man he doesn't trust. Just as he turns to leave, Dumbledore's gaze shifts over Regulus's right shoulder, the smile still on his face. The door to the office opens. Regulus tenses, hard, and watches from the corner of his eye as a tall young man dressed shabbily in Muggle attire steps into the room through the open door. He looks tired, a little haggard, and a lot strained to find the Black Heir standing before him. Regulus doesn't even try to hide the shock in his voice as he addresses Dumbledore. "You invited your pet wolf." Remus Lupin looks just as surprised as Regulus feels, his eyebrows raised high on his tanned, scarred face, right hand tensed where he holds it in his pocket, undoubtedly curled around the wood of his wand. He sighs. "Regulus." Regulus raises his chin to stare Lupin down, despite the fact the werewolf stands far above his smaller frame. "Romulus,